Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we sift through the sources and uncover the stories that make you rethink what you know. Today we're wrestling with a fascinating paradox. Otto von Bismarck, you know the name, right? The Iron Chancellor, the brilliant strategist who unified Germany in the late 19th century. Yet when it came to one of the biggest global trends of his era, colonialism, he was famously, surprisingly, even aggressively reluctant. So our mission for this deep dive is to understand just how Germany, under a leader who once flatly stated, and I'm quoting him here, "I am no man for colonies," ended up acquiring a significant colonial empire. What forces led to this dramatic shift, and what was its lasting, albeit brief, legacy? It's quite a twisty tale.
It truly is. What's so intriguing about Germany's foray into empire building is that unlike the, centuries-old imperial ambitions of Britain or France, their journey wasn't born from some deep-seated proactive colonial vision. Instead, it was a complex response to the intense European competition for overseas territories, what we now call the scramble for Africa, combined with very specific domestic pressures back home. Bismarck found himself navigating these turbulent waters, often, really, against his own strategic inclinations.
That makes the starting point even more compelling, because to truly grasp this paradox, we have to begin with Bismarck's initial, very firm stance against acquiring colonies. He was quite explicit. What were his core arguments? Why did he resist so strongly?
Well, his reasoning was incredibly pragmatic. He wasn't swayed by grand notions of imperial glory or anything like that. For him, the ledger had to balance. First and foremost, he viewed colonies as a significant financial burden. He famously believed they simply wouldn't pay for themselves. Imagine pouring vast sums of money into a new business venture that continuously loses money, drawing resources away from your core profitable operations. That's basically how he saw colonies. Expensive to acquire, even more expensive to maintain, and just a drain on the very resources Germany needed for its European priorities.
So essentially a money pit. That makes sense for someone as, calculating as Bismarck. What else was on his mind?
Beyond the cost, he had serious doubts about Germany's administrative capacity. He believed that the highly efficient German bureaucracy, which was, finely tuned for managing affairs within a unified European state, was simply ill-suited for the challenges of governing vast tropical territories, different climates, cultures, populations. It was a square peg, round hole scenario in his mind. But perhaps his most crucial argument was strategic. Colonies, in his view, would be a major distraction. They would divert Germany's focus and military resources away from Europe, which was Bismarck's primary geopolitical chessboard, always, and risk entangling Germany in unnecessary conflicts. Conflicts with other established colonial powers, especially Britain and France. He even saw French colonial ventures, like in Morocco, as a positive thing, actually.
Really? How so?
Well, he hoped it would distract France from seeking revenge for the loss of Alsace-Lorraine after the Franco-Prussian War. You see, for Bismarck, Europe was the game. Anything that pulled pieces off that board or introduced too many new unpredictable players was seen as a liability, definitely not an asset for Germany.
It's genuinely striking, isn't it? Seeing someone as calculating as Bismarck, so hesitant about something every other major power was rushing towards. He was famous for his long-term vision in Europe. But then the tides began to turn. What exactly were the internal and external pressures that started to chip away at that firm stance?
Yeah, this is where we see Bismarck, the ultimate pragmatist, sort of responding to what became an undeniable current. Yeah. By the late 1870s and early 1880s, multiple pressures were building up. Domestically, there was a growing drumbeat of public opinion, powerful colonial lobby groups emerged, missionary societies advocated for an overseas presence, and influential pamphlets started circulating. One particularly famous one was by Friedrich Fabry, titled, "Does Germany Need Colonies?" It argued really passionately for a colonial empire.
So it wasn't just about dry economic theory, but a real groundswell of kind of FOMO, fear of missing out on the global stage?
Exactly. Imagine a growing sense among the German public. Why are we being left behind? Everyone else is doing it. Many Germans truly believed colonies would offer crucial economic opportunities. Think raw materials for their burgeoning industries, new markets for German manufactured goods, and even an outlet for a perceived surplus population through emigration. That was part of the mix too. Beyond that public sentiment, powerful economic interests also began making their voices heard. Influential Hamburg merchants, traders, and industrialists, many of whom had already established trading posts overseas, were lobbying hard for state protection for their ventures. They wanted the government to safeguard their investments and secure their trade routes. Makes sense. And Bismarck, ever the political chess player, also saw an opportunity here.
How so?
Well, he reportedly used colonialism as a domestic political tool, a way to undercut the anti-colonial liberals who were gaining support from the crown prince and potentially threatened his power base.
Ah, a brilliant move to channel opposition outwards. And then there was the rest of the world too, wasn't there? The international context.
Absolutely. That can't be ignored. The scramble for Africa was in full swing, with other European powers rapidly dividing up the remaining uncolonized territories. Bismarck feared that if Germany didn't participate, it would simply be left behind, losing influence and prestige on the global stage. He couldn't ignore the fact that the map was being redrawn without Germany at the table. So it raises a crucial question, really. Was Bismarck truly converted to the colonial cause? Or was he simply responding to an undeniable current of the time to maintain Germany's standing?
That's a vital distinction. Reacting, not truly converting. And the speed of that reaction was remarkable, wasn't it? What were the first territories Germany claimed, and how quickly did this empire suddenly emerge?
The change of heart, if you can call it that, was indeed dramatic and incredibly swift. In a breathtakingly short span, really from about 1883 to 1885, Bismarck, the anti-colonialist, oversaw Germany acquire vast swaths of Africa and significant Pacific holdings. For instance, April 1884, he placed Adolf Luderitz's trading post and the surrounding territory in what became German Southwest Africa, today's Namibia, under German protection. Just a few months later, July 1884, Togoland and Cameroon in West Africa were declared German protectorates. Then, in 1885, through private treaties signed by this explorer Karl Peters with local chiefs, German East Africa, which encompasses present-day Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, received imperial protection. Germany also claimed northeastern New Guinea and the nearby Bismarck Archipelago in the Pacific in 1884, and other acquisitions like German Samoa and Whitland in Kenya followed in the years after. It was fast.
Wow. So it really was a rapid land grab. And how did he intend to manage these newly acquired lands, given his earlier concerns about the financial burden?
That's a key point. Bismarck initially preferred a system of chartered companies. He granted these private entities the right to administer the territories, aiming to limit direct state involvement and, importantly, financial risk. It was his way of trying to maintain that distance he always preferred. However, history shows that when these private ventures struggled or faced significant resistance from local populations, which they frequently did.
Which they often did, right?
Exactly. The German government was quick to intervene with military force to secure control. The reality quickly outpaced his initial reluctance. By 1885, Germany had quickly emerged as the third largest colonial power in the world, right behind Britain and France.
Incredible.
Imagine the irony. The man who wanted no colonies suddenly overseeing the birth of such a vast empire.
And once he had these territories, Bismarck couldn't just ignore the international implications. This brings us to a truly significant moment. The Berlin Conference of 1884-85. He'd acquired these lands, but now he had to manage the fallout on the global stage. What exactly was his strategy there?
Right, the Berlin Conference was pivotal. It fundamentally shaped the future of Africa. Its primary purpose was to formalize the scramble for Africa. European powers gathered ostensibly to establish rules for the acquisition of African territory, aiming to prevent open conflict among themselves as they carved up the continent. Bismarck, hosting the conference, masterfully presented himself as an honest broker. He mediated between the rival claims of other nations, appearing neutral and diplomatic, while simultaneously ensuring that Germany's new possessions were recognized and secured by international agreement. Sneaky, maybe. So, still playing the European game, even on the African stage? Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, even here, Bismarck's primary focus wasn't about grand imperial expansion for its own sake. Not really. It was always about maintaining the delicate balance of power in Europe and securing Germany's diplomatic position. He used the conference to legitimize Germany's colonial acquisitions while projecting an image of stability and reasonableness to his European counterparts. It's like a chess grandmaster who not only plays his own game, but also sets the rules for everyone else's games to ensure his own pieces are safe and his strategic position in Europe remains unthreatened.
So, for all this empire building, was Bismarck ever truly converted? Or was he still that reluctant architect even after building an empire of this scale? There seems to be an ongoing debate among historians about his true motives, doesn't there?
Absolutely. It's a central debate. And I think the core insight here is that Bismarck's empire wasn't really a product of grand design or some deep-seated imperial vision. Rather, it was a brilliant, if cynical, piece of domestic political engineering and diplomatic leverage. He acquired colonies not necessarily because he believed in their intrinsic value, but because they could diffuse internal dissent, provide an outlet for nationalistic fervor, and, crucially, serve as valuable bargaining chips in his complex European diplomatic strategies.
That makes so much sense. He used them as tools rather than ends in themselves. What does that mean for how these colonies were actually administered and what their impact was?
Precisely. His continued ambivalence meant colonial administration under him was largely focused on economic exploitation with minimal direct governance from Berlin. That was the idea anyway. He relied heavily on those chartered companies, giving them responsibility for development. However, their rule was often harsh, exploitative, and tragically marked by significant violence against local populations. When resistance or rebellion occurred, the German government did not hesitate. It swiftly dispatched military expeditions to restore order, often with brutal force. By the end of Bismarck's tenure, Germany had established this vast colonial empire. It included significant territories in Africa, German East Africa, German Southwest Africa, Cameroon, and Togoland, as well as various holdings in the Pacific, like German New Guinea and Samoa. These colonies, in fact, comprised parts of what are now 22 different countries.
22, wow.
Yeah. But Bismarck's colonial policy, born out of pragmatism and political maneuvering, was ultimately short-lived. He never developed a coherent long-term imperial strategy.
And after Bismarck, did that change? Did things shift?
Dramatically, yeah. After his dismissal in 1890, his successor, Kaiser Wilhelm II, adopted a far more aggressive and expansionist colonial policy. It was known as Weltpolitik, a strategy that aggressively sought Germany's place in the sun as a global, not just European power. This only intensified rivalry with Britain and France, contributing to tensions later on. But Bismarck's reluctant empire lasted only a few decades. It was quickly seized by Allied powers at the outbreak of World War I in 1914, and then formally stripped away by the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. It was an empire born of necessity, maybe convenience, not ambition, and its fleeting nature is really a testament to that.
What a ride. From Bismarck's initial firm opposition through mounting domestic and international pressures to the rapid acquisition of a significant colonial empire, and then his constant ambivalence about its true value. It truly shows how even the most powerful figures can be swayed by the currents of their time, building something they never truly desired. His legacy in colonial affairs is clearly defined by pragmatism and reluctance, with Europe always remaining his ultimate focus.
Indeed. And it makes you think, doesn't it? Does true vision always lead to lasting impact? Or can reactive decisions sometimes inadvertently create massive historical shifts, even if they're short-lived? Bismarck's colonial empire was vast in size but fleeting in duration, a real testament to its reluctant birth. And of course, the story of Germany's colonies and the profound, often tragic impact it had on the people living there. Well, that's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen.